This is the Ink Therapist. Real talk about healing, bodies, and the world we're actually living in. Welcome to the Ink Therapist. Before we get started, a quick reminder. I'm a licensed therapist, but listening to this podcast does not create a therapist-client relationship between us. The information shared here is for educational and entertainment purposes only and shouldn't replace professional mental health care. If you're in crisis or need personalized support, please reach out to a licensed mental health provider in your area or contact a crisis or warm line. And with that, let's jump in. I've been thinking about a particular sentence that I hear a lot. Sometimes people say it to me in a first session. Sometimes they say it about themselves after months of work. And sometimes it's the first thing someone says when they finally find language for something they've been carrying for years. The sentence is, I know I shouldn't feel this way, and I know there's nothing to be afraid of, and I should just be able to relax. I don't know why I can't. And every time I hear it, I think that sentence is carrying a really painful story about what's happening. A story that isn't true, and that's doing a lot of damage. Welcome back to the Ink Therapist. I'm Del Knight, they, them, licensed psychotherapist, somatic therapist, certified body trust specialist, and this is episode 2. Last time, we spent an hour on chronic vigilance, what it is, how it develops, who carries it, and what healing actually looks like. If you haven't heard that episode, it's a good one to start with, though this one will stand on its own. Today, we're going one layer deeper, because before we can really talk about healing, before we can talk about what somatic therapy does or how the nervous system learns new things, we need to address the story most of us have been told about our nervous system responses in the first place. The story is something is wrong with you. And I want to spend this episode replacing it with something more accurate. Your nervous system isn't broken, it's adaptive. Let's talk about what that actually means. The story we've been told. I want to start with language because I think language is where a lot of this goes wrong before it even gets into the therapist's office. Think about how nervous system responses are typically described, both in clinical settings and in everyday conversation. You're too anxious. You're too reactive. You're too sensitive. You overreact. You're easily triggered. You can't handle stress. You're emotionally dysregulated. Notice the structure of those sentences. You are too much. You are insufficient. You, the person, are the site of the problem. The language doesn't say your nervous system is responding to something. It says you are wrong. And this matters. It matters clinically, and it matters in terms of what people bring into the therapy room. Because when you've absorbed the story that you are the problem, the natural next move is to try to fix, override, or suppress what your body is doing. To white knuckle your way through anxiety. To shame yourself for the reactivity. To push the shutdown down and keep going. To use phrases like, it could be worse. To convince your nervous system that what it's experiencing isn't legitimate, none of which works, and all of which add suffering on top of the original suffering. Because you are now managing the symptom and managing the shame about the symptom, that's a lot of work for our nervous system that was already working very hard. Where does this story come from? Some of it comes from clinical frameworks that were built on limited populations and then applied broadly. I've talked about the DSM on the show before, and I'll come back to it. Diagnostic language is often built around deviations from a norm. And the norm it deviates from is not neutral. It's historically white, neurotypical, cisgendered, non-disabled, and Western. Some of it comes from cultural messages about emotional control. The idea that composed people are strong people, that visible emotional response is weakness, that a regulated nervous system looks like one that doesn't have visible responses. Some of it comes from individual histories, families, communities, systems that explicitly or implicitly communicated that your responses were inconvenient, excessive, or wrong. And some of it is genuinely well-meaning. Clinicians who care about their clients and want to help them suffer less, and who have been trained in frameworks that locate the solution inside the person without asking what the person's responses are actually in relationship to. All of these sources produce the same outcome. A person sitting across from me who has been at war with their own nervous system for years, sometimes decades. I want to name clearly what that war costs. It cost energy, an enormous amount of energy that could go towards actually living is instead going towards managing the internal experience of living. It costs relationship. It's very hard to be close to people when part of your attention is always on monitoring and suppressing what's happening inside of you. It costs access to information. Your nervous system is giving you data constantly about your environment, about your relationships, about what's safe and what isn't. When you've learned to dismiss the data as noise, you lose access to something genuinely useful. And it costs, I think this is the one that doesn't get named enough, a certain kind of self-trust. When you've been told long enough that your responses are wrong, you stop trusting yourself to know what's true for you. You outsource your own experience to other people's interpretations of it. That's a profound loss, and it starts with the story. What your nervous system is actually doing. So let me tell you what's actually happening when your nervous system does the things that have been called symptoms. Your nervous system is a prediction machine. I said this in the last episode, but I want to go deeper on in today because I think it's the frame that changes everything. Your nervous system is not waiting for things to happen and then reacting to them. It is constantly in real time generating predictions about what is likely to happen next and preparing your body to respond to those predictions. This is happening below the level of conscious thought. By the time you have a feeling or a reaction, your nervous system has already run a very fast probability assessment based on everything it has ever experienced, everything it has learned to expect, and everything it has been primed to notice. It is, in other words, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Here's an example that I find helpful. Imagine you've been in a relationship, romantic, familial, whatever, where conflict escalated unpredictably, where a small thing could suddenly become a very large thing, where you learned through experience that a raised voice or a particular silence or someone's specific facial expression was a reliable early signal of something threatening coming. Your nervous system learned that pattern. It filed it. And now, years later, in a completely different relationship with a completely different person, when that person raises their voice slightly or goes quiet in a particular way, your body responds. Not because you decided to overreact, not because you have a disorder, because your nervous system is doing its job. It's taking in current data, cross-referencing it with historical pattern, and generating a response that made sense in the context where it was learned. The pattern is operating on old software. But the software was written accurately. It was written from real experience. Now, here's the part that the something is wrong with you story completely misses. When we locate the problem inside the person, when we say, you are too reactive, you are too anxious, we skip the most important clinical question, which is, what is this response in relationship to? Because the response is always in relationship to something. It was learned somewhere. It was accurate somewhere. It is being generated by a system that is, in its own way, trying to protect you. The question isn't, how do we make this stop? The question is, what is this protecting, and does it still need to work this hard? Those are very different questions, and they lead to very different therapy. I want to say something about the relationship between distress and systems. In episode 1, I named this directly, that some people are carrying chronic vigilance not because of individual trauma history alone, but because they are living inside systems that are actively threatening. That the hypervigilance of a trans person in 2026 is a response to real legislative and social threat. That racial battle fatigue is a real response to real documented ongoing racism. That the exhaustion of neurodivergent masking is a real response to real neurotypical expectations that don't fit. I want to extend that frame here to this episode's question. When we pathologize the response without naming the conditions that produced it, we are doing something that has a name in critical psychology. We are individualizing systemic harm. We are taking something that is a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation and locating it entirely inside the person who is responding. We are asking the person to fix themselves while leaving the situation intact. That is not neutral clinical practice. It is a political act, and I want to be honest about that. What adapted actually means. So let me spend some time on this word I put in the title of this episode, adapted, because I want to be careful with it. Because I think it's easy to hear your nervous system adapted and read it as everything is actually fine, you're doing great, nothing needs to change. That's not what I mean. Adaptation in the context I'm using it means that your nervous system made adaptations. It made adjustments, real, lasting, structural adjustments in response to the conditions of your actual life, not the idealized conditions, the actual ones. It means those adjustments were, at the time and in the circumstances that produced them, the tools you had available and the best available response. It does not mean they are the response you would choose if you had a full menu of options. It does not mean they serve you equally well in every context, and it does not mean they can't change. What it means is they make sense, that they have logic, and that they were produced by a system that was doing its best. And that matters, not as a comfort, but as a foundation for actual work. Here's how I think about this clinically. When a client comes to me and says, I can't be in conflict without completely shutting down, the unhelpful question is, how do we make you not shut down? The useful question is, where did shutdown become the best option available to you? Because almost always there's an answer. Maybe conflict in their family of origin escalated dangerously and shutdown was protective. Maybe expressing emotion resulted in punishment and going flat was safer. Maybe they learned accurately that in a particular environment, their internal experience was not welcome. Shutdown was a solution. It worked. It kept them functionally inside conditions that were genuinely difficult. The fact that it's still running in contexts where it's no longer necessary, where there are other options, where conflict doesn't actually carry the same threat, that's not a character flaw. That's a nervous system that hasn't yet had enough evidence that a different response is available. The work is providing that evidence slowly in a context that can actually hold it. I want to say something about respect because I think this word belongs in clinical conversations and I don't think it gets there enough. The adaptations your nervous system made deserve respect. Not in a toxic positivity way, not your trauma made you stronger or everything happens for a reason. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that your nervous system did something extraordinary under difficult circumstances. It kept you functional. It kept you alive. It built a model of the world that, given what you had to work with, was the most accurate model it could build. That deserves acknowledgement. Not just, yes, and now how do we fix it, but a genuine recognition of the intelligence and the effort involved. In my experience, healing goes faster, or rather goes more sustainably, when there's room for that acknowledgement. Whether we can hold both things at once, this served you and this is also costing you, and we can work with both of those truths simultaneously. One more thing in this section that I think is important. Adaptation is not a fixed state. The nervous system that adapted once can adapt again. This is the scientific basis for neuroplasticity, which is a word that has been slightly overused in wellness culture. You'll see it on supplements and self-help books, and I understand why that's annoying. But the underlying concept is real and it matters clinically. Your nervous system is not a fixed structure. It is a living, learning, changing system that continues to update its model based on new experience. The adaptation that produced chronic vigilance or emotional shutdown or hyperreactivity, that adaptation was learned. And what you learned can be expanded upon, not erased, not overwritten, but joined by new learning, new evidence, a wider range of available responses. That is the biological foundation of what somatic therapy is actually doing when it works. It's not talking you out of old responses. It's building new ones alongside them. Why just relax doesn't work. I want to address something that I think a lot of people have experienced and found profoundly unhelpful. The instruction to just relax. Or its close relatives, just let go. You're safe now. There's nothing to worry about. It's all in your head. Try to think positive. Have you tried breathing? I say this with genuine warmth for anyone who has offered this advice to someone they love, because I know it's coming from wanting to help. But I also want to explain clearly why it doesn't work and why, in some ways, it can actually make things worse. Here's the thing about nervous system responses. They are not primarily governed by the thinking, language-based part of your brain. Instead, they are governed by older, faster subcortical systems that were operating long before you had the cognitive capacity to analyze your situation and decide how to feel about it. When your threat detection system fires, when your body responds to a pattern it has learned to associate with danger, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that does reasoning and planning and language, goes partially offline. This is a feature, not a bug. In a real emergency, you don't want to be composing sentences. You want your body to move. But it means that once the threat response is activated, talking to yourself about it, telling yourself to relax, reminding yourself that you're safe, running logical arguments against the anxiety is largely ineffective. You are trying to use a system that has been deprioritized to regulate a system that is in charge. This is why insight alone doesn't heal the body. I see this in practice a lot. Someone has done significant work, years of talk therapy, deep self-understanding, a genuinely sophisticated analysis of their own patterns, and they still can't be in conflict without shutting down. They still can't walk into certain spaces without their body going on high alert. They still can't receive care without bracing for it to be taken away. And they often come in frustrated with themselves, feeling like they should be further along, like understanding the pattern should have been enough to change it. It's not. Understanding the pattern is genuinely valuable. I'm not dismissing it. Knowing why your nervous system does what it does changes your relationship to it. It reduces shame. It opens up curiosity. It creates the conditions for change. But the change itself, the actual updating of the nervous system's model, happens through experience. Through the body having new things happen in it repeatedly in safe enough context over time. That's what somatic therapy is. It's the deliberate creation of new experience for the nervous system to learn from. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. Let's say someone has learned through real experience that being vulnerable with another person results in being hurt. The nervous system has filed that pattern. And so in relationships, when intimacy starts to build, the nervous system starts generating signals. Brace, deflect, pull back. This isn't safe. A purely cognitive approach might say, let's examine the evidence. Is this person actually threatening? Where's the data? Can you think of a time where vulnerability was okay? And that's useful. It's not useless, but the nervous system doesn't primarily update from logical argument. It updates from lived experience. So the somatic work might also involve noticing what happens in your body as you get closer to someone. Learning to stay with a small amount of that sensation without immediately acting on it. Building evidence slowly in the body, not just the mind. That vulnerability in this particular context with this particular person produces something other than harm. That's not fast. That's often uncomfortable. That requires a therapeutic relationship that is itself a safe enough context for that kind of learning. But that's what actually shifts the pattern. Starting with curiosity, not combat. I want to spend a few minutes on something that I think is the actual starting place for this work. Not a technique, not a framework, a shift in orientation. The shift is this: from combat with your nervous system to curiosity about it. I know that sounds simple. I know it might even sound a little like the kind of thing that gets put on a motivational poster. Stay with me. Most people who have been at war with their nervous system for a long time are exhausted. And they often arrive in therapy with the implicit or explicit goal of making their responses stop, or fixing the broken thing, or finally getting their body under control. And I understand that impulse completely. These responses carry real suffering. Of course you want them to stop. But I want to offer a different starting question. What if instead of, how do I make this stop? The question was, what is this trying to do for me? What is the anxiety scanning for? What is the shutdown protecting? What is the hypervigilance tracking that it believes is important? Because your nervous system is not your enemy. It is doing what it was built to do with the information it has in the service of your survival. When we approach it with curiosity rather than correction, when we get interested in what it's doing rather than immediately trying to override it, a few things happen. First, the system itself tends to settle slightly. There's something about being witnessed rather than suppressed that allows a small amount of regulation to happen, even in the body, even in the absence of any technique. Second, we get to access information. The nervous system has things to tell us about what felt unsafe, about what it learned, about what it's been protecting. When we're in combat with it, we can't hear any of that. When we get quiet and curious, we start to. And third, and I think this is the most important one, it changes your relationship with yourself. One of the most profound shifts I've witnessed in clinical work is the moment someone moves from, I hate that I do this, to, I wonder why I do this. It sounds small. It is not small. I hate that I do this keeps the war going. It adds shame to whatever the original experience was. It makes the body a problem and you, the frustrated problem solver who can't solve it. I wonder why I do this opens a door. It makes you the curious investigator of your own experience. It positions the nervous system as something worth understanding rather than something to be defeated. And it creates the conditions, the relational, internal conditions under which new learning is actually possible. This is not passive. Curiosity is not the same as acceptance. You can be genuinely curious about something and still want it to change. But curiosity is where healing begins. Not techniques, not willpower, not the right diagnoses or the right medication or the right framework. And I'm not dismissing those. Those are all very important aspects of the work. However, the willingness to get interested in your own experience on its own terms without immediately trying to fix it is the first moment towards something different. And I want to be honest, this is not easy to do alone. The reason we do this work in relationship, in a therapeutic relationship or in community or with a trusted person who can help hold what we're noticing, is the curiosity about our own nervous system often requires a witness. Someone who can help us stay in the inquiry when the inquiry gets uncomfortable. Someone who doesn't flinch when we find what we find. That's what good therapy is. Not the dispensing of insights, not the application of techniques to a broken system. It's the creation of a relationship in which a nervous system that has learned that people aren't safe can slowly, incrementally, and on its own timeline begin to find out that this particular person in this particular context might be different. That's the work. And it's not small, and it's not fast, and it is, in my experience, genuinely possible. Okay, let me bring this home. I want to give you something to carry from this episode, not as homework, but as an invitation. The next time your nervous system does the thing, the next time the anxiety fires or the shutdown comes or the hypervigilance turns on when everything is technically fine, see if you can catch yourself before you go to the first response, which is often some version of, not this again. and try, even briefly, to ask something different. What are you tracking right now? What does this feel like this is protecting? What did you learn this was for? You don't have to have the answer. The question itself starts something. If this episode found you, if something in the last hour shifted something, even slightly, in how you're thinking about your own body, I want to name that matters. Changing the story we tell about ourselves is not a small thing. It is often the precondition for everything else. At Soma Roots Therapy, this kind of work, slow, somatic, body-centered, built on the premise that your nervous system is not your enemy, is what I do. I'm accepting new clients in Oregon and Washington. Sessions are done via telehealth, and I'm in network with a variety of commercial insurances. Sliding scale and self-pay options are also available. The link to reach out is in the show notes, and the companion blog for this episode is also there. Same material in a format you can read, save, and share with people who might need it. No hard sell, no urgency. You know when you're ready, and I'll be here. Next episode, we're going into something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. Slow therapy. What it actually means for healing to move at your pace. Not the consolation prize version of slow, not we'll get there eventually, but slow as the actual method, as the thing that makes it work. We're going to talk about what titration actually looks like in practice, about what a session can be when it's not trying to produce breakthrough, and why I think the field's relationship with urgency, the implicit belief that faster is better, that efficient healing is good healing, is doing real harm. That one's going to be episode 3, and I hope you'll be there. Thank you for being here, for slowing down long enough to listen, and for taking your nervous system seriously enough to spend an hour learning about it. I'm Del Knight. This is the Ink Therapist. Slow down, feel it, root deeper. See you next time.